Today, in Real Life Archives, the day 62 kids saw an UFO.
There are certain moments in history that totally defy easy categorization. Events that, honestly, just shatter the fragile boundaries of our understood reality and leave behind a wake of enduring, completely unanswerable questions. Welcome to our documentary analysis of one of those exact moments. We're diving deep into an incident that remains a massive, singular inflection point in the study of anomalous phenomena. And what makes this one so different is that it's not defined by blurry photographs or solitary isolated claims. No, this event is defined by the sheer, overwhelming volume of primary witnesses. We're going to systematically reconstruct the forensic and socio-psychological reality of what actually happened at the Ariel School.
The eyes looked at me. They were big and black and long. Now those are the words of a child. She wasn't reciting a script, and she wasn't repeating a line she heard in a movie. She was genuinely struggling to articulate a reality that had literally just unfolded right in front of her. To truly grasp the gravity of this case, we have to strip away our preconceptions. We need to look at the raw data, the visceral human reactions, and the physical environment of a Friday morning that changed dozens of lives forever. Let's slowly, methodically trace the preconditions of this profound mystery.
Section 1. The Friday Morning Encounter, September 16, 1994.
To comprehend this encounter, we really have to understand the setting first. Back in the early 1990s, Rua, Zimbabwe, wasn't some heavily developed urban center. It was primarily an agricultural crossroads. But the Ariel School itself, that was an elite private institution. It attracted the children of affluent, mostly urban-connected families who had significant access to global television and media. Now, the psychological groundwork for what happened to these modern, plugged-in students was actually laid 2 days prior. On the night of September 14, 1994, a massive fireball streaked across the southern African sky, triggering a huge surge of panicked reports. It was later confirmed to be the atmospheric re-entry of a Zenit 2 rocket, but it created a highly localized UFO mania. So the atmosphere was primed. 2 days later, on Friday, September 16th, around 10 a.m., the school's faculty gathered indoors for a staff meeting. That left the students to enjoy a mid-morning recess out in the playing fields, totally unsupervised for 15 critical minutes.
Think about the physical layout for a second. The manicured playing fields of the school bordered this patch of dense, untamed Miombo woodland and scrub. Naturally, this entire area was strictly out of bounds for the students. But it was right here, in the tall grass and the deep shadows of the tree line, that the children reported seeing something descend from the sky. They described glinting, metallic silver objects, often referred to as disc-shaped, dropping down into the brush. Because every single teacher was indoors, the children experienced this descent without any adult intervention. No filtering, no immediate rationalization. They were drawn right to that boundary line entirely on their own.
62. Think about that number for a moment. That is the exact detail that elevates the Rua incident from just another local curiosity into a globally significant anomaly. 62 primary witnesses ranging in age from 6 to 12 years old. In the study of anomalous phenomena, solitary, isolated observers are the absolute norm. Finding a mass daylight sighting involving over 60 specific identifiable individuals, that's profoundly rare. What we're actually looking at here is a collective visual, auditory, and psychological experience that was shared simultaneously across a massive cohort of developing minds.
Section 2. The Silent Warning, a message without words.
As those glinting objects settled into the topography of the scrub, the entire encounter shifted. It transitioned from an aerial anomaly to a direct, proximity-based entity interaction. And we have to treat these extraordinary claims with strict analytical neutrality. The morphology of the beings they described was shockingly uniform. The entities were reported to be small, right around 3 to 4 feet tall, dressed in skin-tight, shiny black outfits that some of the kids actually likened to scuba suits. Their skin was described as pale and plasticky. But the absolute most terrifying aspect for these kids was the movement. These entities didn't walk normally. The students described them as moving in slow motion, or kind of glitching, almost appearing to teleport from one spot to another as if completely defying the linear constraints of physics. That nonlinear staccato movement, that's what triggered an overwhelming, visceral sense of dread.
The sensory experience of this encounter was incredibly multi-layered. It actually began with auditory signals, a deep humming, almost like heavy electricity, or a high-pitched sound like a flute. But the moment that children made eye contact with these entities, the interaction became purely cognitive. The beings had these massive, black, almond-shaped eyes that the kids described as looking like rugby balls. When a child locked eyes with an entity, they reported experiencing a direct, nonverbal cognitive interface, a sort of thought locking. The entity's small, slit-like mouth never moved. Instead, the children experienced what can really only be described as overwhelming, instantaneous mental imagery projected directly into their consciousness.
And the content of that telepathic transmission was distinctly apocalyptic. Through these forced mental images, the underlying message was clear. I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world. Children as young as 6 reported receiving highly complex ecological and technological warnings. They were hit with visions of a devastated Earth, trees dying, barren soil, unbreathable air. They felt this massive, overwhelming wave of sadness and received a stark warning about humanity becoming far too technologed. The entities seemed to be directly conveying that our current industrial trajectory was going to lead to the utter destruction of the planet.
Section 3. Documenting the trauma. The artifacts of encounter.
Let's shift our focus to the immediate aftermath of that 15-minute recess, because as those 15 minutes ended, the psychological pressure just broke. The transition from witnessing this profound anomaly back to the highly structured reality of the school environment resulted in absolute, unmitigated pandemonium. 62 children turned around and fled from that boundary line, sprinting back toward the school buildings in varying states of sheer hysteria. When the faculty finally emerged from their meeting, they weren't met with a bunch of kids giggling over a coordinated prank. They were hit by a literal wall of crying, hyperventilating, terrified students who absolutely refused to step foot back on that playground. It was that sudden, universal panic that ultimately convinced a deeply dismissive faculty that something deeply traumatizing had just happened.
Facing an absolute uprising of terrified students and incredibly concerned parents, the school administration had to do something. Their first structured attempt to document the event gave us the most tangible forensic artifacts we possess today: the drawings. Investigators and staff asked the children to draw what they had seen, and crucially, they often separated them into different rooms to prevent any cross-contamination of their stories. And the results? They are haunting. Dozens of students, working in total isolation, produced starkly, remarkably similar sketches.
When you actually place the physical reality of that tree line right next to the children's collective artistic memory, the correlation is honestly chilling. Sure, the artistic skill varied a lot depending on the age of the child, but the core architectural elements of the memory were virtually universal. They drew the exact same silver dome discs hovering near the exact same trees. They drew the exact same small, dark-clad figures with those oversized black eyes. And if you look closely, the frantic, heavy coloring in many of the drawings further points to a state of acute psychological trauma. Getting this level of specific, isolated visual consistency represents a massive, massive hurdle for any traditional psychological explanation.
Section 4. The Harvard Investigation. Psychiatry meets high strangeness.
An incident of this magnitude simply couldn't be contained to Ruwa. Within days, local rumors exploded into a massive international story, drawing in external authorities that completely altered the trajectory of the case. The investigation happened in waves. Just 3 days after the event, seasoned BBC war correspondent Tim Leach showed up, capturing the earliest, most raw testimony. He was closely followed by local researcher Cynthia Hind. Now, her methodology involved interviewing the children in groups, a practice that is highly criticized today because it potentially allows the children to inadvertently contaminate each other's memories. Then, about 2 months later, the case escalated to the absolute highest levels of academia. Dr. John E. Mack, a Pulitzer Prize-winning professor of psychiatry from Harvard Medical School, stepped off a plane in Zimbabwe. Dr. Mack's approach was completely different. He didn't look at these children as subjects to be debunked. He treated them as genuine experiencers of profound trauma. Using his deep clinical expertise, he bonded with them, conducting very in-depth one-on-one interviews on camera. And Mack's conclusion? He determined that the severe emotional distress he observed was entirely consistent with a genuine, highly traumatic physical event. He firmly believed the children were not lying. He famously noted that the way they talked about it left virtually no question in his mind that what happened was just about exactly what they said happened. However, his deep involvement in this case would eventually trigger a highly publicized formal inquiry by Harvard University into his clinical methods, throwing the entire Ruwa case directly into the center of a very fierce academic debate.
Section 5. Skepticism and alternate theories, seeking a prosaic truth.
Over the years, researchers have proposed 4 prevailing paradigms to explain the Ruai incident, and we have to treat these prosaic models with the exact same intellectual rigor as the extraordinary claims made by the children. First, you have the non-human intelligence hypothesis. This neatly accounts for the stunning consistency of the testimonies, but, of course, heavily lacks empirical, physical proof. Second is mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria. The idea here is that the stress of the elite school, combined with that prior rocket re-entry, triggered a sociogenic contagion. While this explains the collective panic, it utterly fails to account for those specific, matching drawings produced in complete isolation. The third is the deeply fascinating puppet theory. This suggests the children inadvertently witnessed a traveling environmental education troupe that used large-headed puppets. It's an interesting idea, yet there is zero record of any such troupe visiting the school that day. Finally, there's the hoax theory, largely championed by a single former student who claims he just started a rumor over a shiny rock. But that model wholly contradicts the deeply lived experiences and intense testimonies of the other 61 witnesses.
But perhaps the most critical vulnerability in the entire Rua case lies in the realm of investigator bias. We really have to ask a difficult, probing question regarding those famous telepathic environmental warnings. You see, Dr. John Mack was a very well-known environmental activist with a deep, profound interest in ecological preservation. Critics have meticulously pointed out that Mack frequently asked the children leading questions, constantly prompting them to consider how the entities made them feel about the planet. So we have to neutrally consider the possibility here. Did the children actually originate that complex anti-pollution narrative entirely on their own? Or were these young, impressionable minds unknowingly guided to construct this specific message by the well-meaning yet heavily biased questions of a Harvard psychiatrist months after the actual event took place?
Section 6. A decades-long conviction, the longitudinal weight of trauma.
To truly evaluate the reality of this stimulus, we have to shift our narrative to the present day. 30 years. 3 entire decades have passed since that Friday morning in the brush. In recent years, documentarians have spent immense resources tracking down the original students. They are now adults scattered all across the globe, from Canada to the UK to South Africa. Now, in the realm of psychology, it's highly expected that time, maturity, and sheer distance will eventually erode childhood fantasies or group lies. People crack, stories change, yet across 30 years, despite immense, relentless social pressure to recant, not a single one of the core adult witnesses extensively interviewed has ever retracted their story. Not one. They maintain with absolute, unwavering conviction that what they saw that day was a physical reality.
And this longitudinal data reveals a truly profound psychological toll. These adults carry the heavy, incredibly isolating stigma of being an experiencer. They describe the event as being permanently burned into their minds. Imagine growing up in a world that universally dismissed the most traumatic moment of your life. They were called mad, they were called liars, they were teased mercilessly. It got to the point where many of them hid their experiences from their own spouses and closest friends for decades, just to avoid the constant ridicule. This deeply ingrained hesitancy to speak, this desperate avoidance of the spotlight, that is a recognized clinical hallmark of genuine unprocessed trauma.
Honestly, this lifelong persistence of memory strikes a very severe blow to the traditional model of mass psychogenic illness. Think about it. In documented cases of sociogenic contagion, the shared delusion almost always dissipates once the social stressor is removed and the group is physically dispersed. The symptoms naturally fade away. But the Ariel School cohort was completely dismantled. They moved to entirely different continents, they integrated into totally different cultures, and they lived entirely separate lives. Yet the memory did not dissipate. The visual and emotional signatures of the event remained rigidly intact across both space and time. That fundamentally challenges our foundational understanding of how collective memory is supposed to operate.
And so, we're left standing at the edge of that tree line, peering out into the absolute unknown. We've examined the historical context, we've looked at the forensic drawings, we've debated the methodological flaws of the investigators, and we've witnessed the enduring psychological scars of the adults who were there. The Rua contact fiercely resists easy categorization by both the hard empirical skeptic and the true believer. It's a mystery that forcefully makes us confront the strict limitations of our scientific frameworks. Because if a mass hallucination simply cannot endure for 30 years, and if a physical craft seemingly defies our established laws of physics, what is the truth? If 62 children shared a profound identical trauma that remains utterly unshaken 3 decades later, what truly happened in the tall grass of Ariel School? The answer, at least for now, remains hidden in the deep silence of that Friday morning.
This is just one story. There are many more you wouldn't believe. Subscribe for the next one.